Listening to Advancing the Cause, the podcast of IFCA International. I'm your host, Richard Bargas. I'm the Executive Director of IFCA. And today I have with me John-Michael Wong. He's a good friend and an IFCA member, and he's an elder at Evangel Bible Church in Berkeley, California. Today we're going to be talking about faith and work and how it is that we can live as Christians and yet be in a vocational ministry where it's away from the church work that we might do. As I said, John Michael's an elder at his church, but that's not what he does professionally. He's got training in a whole different field, and he spends a lot of his time with people who don't know Christ. And so how does that work out? I want us to get to know John Michael a little bit and then to talk about how can we be effective Christians in a work world that is far away from the church. So John Michael, welcome, and why don't you share a little bit about us, about where you work and kind of what you do so that we can get to know you a little bit.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bargas. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to join you on this podcast. And my name is John Michael, or JM for short. It's actually only one syllable shorter, but it's faster to type, JM. But I was born in San Francisco, so I've grown up in California my whole life here. Grew up in Southern California, mostly in San Bernardino and in the Redlands area. And then came back to the Bay Area here to go to college at UC Berkeley. And that was when God saved me. I was a college student, and some of the friends that I had met in the dorms took the time to share the gospel with me. And that was really the first time I had ever truly read and understood the Bible. And that was when I became a Christian, when I was a junior in college. God had put me in a situation where I started to feel the weight of my own sin and recognized my need for repentance and to turn to Jesus. And so I ended up staying at the university a grand total of 10 years. I liked it so much that I graduated 3 times. I got my undergraduate degree in civil engineering and stayed for graduate school. There was an opportunity to study structural engineering, and so I finished my master's degree and PhD in that field, and then stayed at the university and taught structural analysis. And then that was when I transitioned to working in industry about 16 years ago. And so I currently work as a structural engineer in downtown San Francisco. We design buildings mostly out of steel, concrete, wood, masonry, and I've been at the same company for 16 years. It was my first job out of school. And I'm also involved in some national level professional activities. I'm in an innovation group that's focused on artificial intelligence in the structural engineering profession. And beyond that, my wife and I, we met at church. My wife, Clara, we met at church when she was a student at UC Berkeley. We've also been married for 16 years now. We have 3 children. We have a 13-year-old daughter, 11-year-old daughter, and an 8-year-old son. And this is fun being on a podcast because our church recently started a podcast as well called the Evangel Answers Podcast, where we focus on answering questions that people that we meet on campus at UC Berkeley or in the community around us, or sometimes people from our church that just ask us questions about Jesus Christ, the Bible, and Christianity. And how I actually got into civil and structural engineering was actually very much related to my testimony of conversion. But before I was a Christian, I was actually focused on a very different field. I was focused on studying like computers. I was part of an internet startup back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But when God saved me, I realized that what I was doing and the nature of the clients that the company I was working for took on was just it was not good. And so I kind of turned away from that and left that startup job that I had. And I kind of reacted to it by wanting to do something completely different from computers. It's like, no, I want to do something that's like physical and real. And that's how I turned into looking into civil and structural engineering because I wanted to work on things that got built, things that helped people. But as time went on, I ended up using a lot of those computer skills and other background to really help in the profession where I'm working now. And working, in my view, is really, this is the place where the Bible comes alive in the workplace. This is a place where the Proverbs come alive. We read about the villain of the Proverbs, the sluggard, and a lot of the desire that God has for us to be good and faithful workers. And I think that this is where I see that God has been working in me, my sanctification, by being in the workplace, being watched by the world, and to see how I'm going to respond and how I'm going to react to situations, how I'm going to serve others. And it's a fantastic opportunity to grow in faith and to see God's faithfulness in the workplace every day.
That's great. And, even as you're speaking, I'm reminded that, a lot of people will think, well, I'm a layman, so therefore I don't have a lot of understanding of the Bible because I don't have a seminary degree, which you don't have, and I don't have a lot of ability to study the Bible for myself. But I'm reminded that you actually have published a commentary on the book of Acts from day one, I believe, and so you study the Bible without a seminary degree. You're an elder at your church. You know the Word of God well, and that should be an encouragement as well, maybe as a mild rebuke to anybody out there that says, well, there's this giant chasm between what it means to be a layman and what it means to be a vocational Christian worker. You've really kind of bridged the two of those and said, no, I am a layman, but I get into the Word and I study it for myself, and I feel comfortable teaching it because that's what we're called to do as elders in the church. I think that's helpful for people to hear. Now, go ahead.
One of the things that I remember when I was still a college student, and when I was in graduate school, I was really influenced by a book by J. Oswald Sanders, The Spiritual Leadership, The Principles of Excellence for Every Believer. And he had this quote. He said, "Suppose that we allot ourselves a generous 8 hours a day for sleep, and few need more than that. 3 hours for meals and conversation, 10 hours for work and travel. Still, we have 35 hours each week to fill. What happens to them? How are they invested?" And he goes on and he says, "A person's entire contribution to the kingdom may turn on how those hours are used. Certainly, those hours determine whether life is commonplace or extraordinary." And I think that just having that perspective on time management, I think really comes out in the workplace. I think that you learn the value of time and the scarcity of it. And that's really one of the things that has stuck with me in terms of balancing those different priorities of serving the Lord, serving his people in the church, but also being realistic about the effort and all of the time that we invest into the workplace. I'm in the workplace, 40, 50 hours a week, plus commuting time, plus time for lunches, time to spend with people. And it's a significant portion of one's day to be in the office. And it's not just something that you do on the side and then you get to the real service, but no, that's just part of life. And work is part of life, and that's how God created us. God created us to be workers. And I think that's something that has really kind of shaped my view and understanding of work, is just realizing that work pre-existed the fall. When God created us, and we think about who we are, and we were created by God to work, to be creative, to use the strength of our mind and body to do what he made us to do. He made us in his own image. and he took Adam and set him in the garden to cultivate it and to keep it. And that was part of being made in God's image.
Mhm. I'm reminded that even Jesus said that my Father always works and that he would be about his Father's business. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that Sanders quote, because oftentimes I see this in us, whether we work in ministry or whether we work out in the world, is that a lot of times people will have the mindset of, I've spent all this time, 40, 50, 60 hours in my workplace. Now, I'm sorry, Lord, but I'll give you a couple hours on a Sunday, but the rest of the time is mine. And yet it's not ours, it's the Lord's, and we need to do with it what we can. Not that we're to be, exhausting ourselves and killing ourselves from overwork, but you have a wife, you have 3 children, you have a full-time job, and yet you still serve the Lord, you still study the Word, you still live a life that is full. And sometimes I think we give ourselves big excuses, is that just going to go home and my time is my time and I'm going to do what I want to. I'm going to be involved in things that aren't necessarily bad. But in doing that, I think we need to examine all of the time that we have, not only our time at work, but even the time away from work. And is this all pleasing to the Lord? Am I using it? Am I effective in my life? Or am I just kind of whittling away the bit of time that I have that the Lord has given me, even while I'm away from work? But I'd like to turn our attention to that slice of our life, which is a big chunk that actually has to do with work. How have you been able to integrate your Christian life, your faith, with your work life? All the way back to the medieval times, there was this division between vocation, that was you go do your job, and then there was the clergy who did their job, and the two didn't meet. If you were a monk, you were going to be off reading the Bible. And if you were a guy that was picking up dung on the road with your donkey, that's what you did. A guy was farming. Everybody was separate. But for us, we need to understand that what you just described, even going back to the original creation, it's not meant to be that. That it's not supposed to be one box is vocation, it's work life, and another box is faith. They actually should all be a part of one giant box that is just life. So what does that mean to you? How does that look when we talk about everyday life and how the two of them fit together? Because it's not always simple, and I'm sure that there are challenges when it comes to that in playing itself out that you've experienced.
Yeah, that's a great topic to think about how that all fits together with our various responsibilities. And I think it comes down to the issue of also sorting out one's priorities too. And priorities are really only an issue when they conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. If you're able to fulfill all of your priorities, then that's great. But sometimes there are those pressure moments when in the office there's a big deadline. Maybe there's something that demands my attention and care in the family, in the home, or in the church. And I think that there's a phrase that I've heard a lot, which is work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And I actually don't really like that term too much, because it almost makes it sound like they're opposed to each other. That like work fights with life, and that there's some kind of a balance between them, and it almost makes it seem like they fight each other. But really the view that has helped me in understanding is to see work is part of our life. And the Lord is the one who provides the power to make wealth. He's the one that provides work. And work is good. It's the conduit that God uses to allow us to provide for our families, so that our abundance can be a supply for the needs of others as we give and support those vocational Christian workers, to support pastors and missionaries so that they can devote themselves full time to the work of preaching and teaching and equipping the saints for the work of service. And God uses all of those things through people who work to be able to provide and share. And I think that there's a few passages in the New Testament that that have really helped me to put the pieces together. One of them is in Colossians 3, starting in verse 22. It says, "Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but with integrity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord, rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. Serve the Lord Christ." And it's that phrase in verse 23 says, "Do your work heartily as for the Lord." And that's when you put your energy and attention with your whole being, choosing to work for Him, that pleases the Lord. And putting in that 40 plus hour week at work and serving Him, knowing that the work that you do is walking in all of the good works that He has prepared beforehand for us to walk in. And in Ephesians 2:10 talks about how God prepares those kinds of things for us. And I think that once we see that work is part of our life, work is a gift from God, and He allows us to do that, it completely changes my view of just seeing it, is that it's not just drudgery, but it's a great privilege and opportunity to exercise the skill that God has given to me, and to work heartily for Him. And there is a similar passage in Ephesians 6 in verse 5 and 6 says, "Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the integrity of your heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart." And that takes place in the workplace. And I think about the way that our workplace is structured, and we have a lot of freedom. Like most of us have the opportunity to choose the types of jobs and careers that we will walk into. But in the first century, even a lot of the Christians were slaves. They were saved while slaves, and they remained slaves, and they continued to serve the Lord, doing His will from the heart, even while they were in the earthly circumstances they were in at the time.
That's very helpful, I think, for a lot of our listeners, because I've spoken out against, you have these books like David Platt's book Radical, and others that really paint a picture of Christianity as something that is like over the top, that you need to be leaving to trips to India all the time and feeding the extreme poor and helping the needy, and you got to just be radical. And I remember sharing this with a young man here in our local church, saying what he did was he got married when he was younger. He didn't just play video games in his mom's basement kind of thing. He got married. He made a commitment to a young woman. They got married. He built his house, which not everybody can do, but he built a house with his own hands. Now they've got 2 little children, beautiful little girls, and he works a hard job where he's a mechanic and he sells parts and he works on stuff. And I told him, I said, "Hey, brother, you're doing what we need to do. What the New Testament is clear that most Christians have been called to do, which is not this radical lifestyle, but it's a slow, steady plodding. That's the normal Christian life, is you work hard, you live for Christ, you do what you're supposed to do, and you do that for the rest of your life. You may not ever go to India, or may never go to Pakistan or to China or something on some crazy mission trip and give everything away and go wandering out in the desert. You don't have to do that to be a faithful Christian. What you're describing is the normal Christian life, is live your life in a way that's pleasing to God and work hard. Yeah, you're going to share Christ with people at your workplace and at your marketplace and in your neighborhood. But radical really comes down to just living the normal life, especially in this country. And of course, you there in the South Bay of California, Northern California, that is radical. I mean, living as a straight man who works hard and just lives for Jesus, even using the name Jesus openly is a radical proposition. But I think that people get in their mind, no, 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 that's not enough. And what I'm hearing you saying you've been doing, and I hear clearly from the testimony of Scripture, including the passages you read, is that, faithfulness in your job, working not unto men, not for the promotion, not for the money, not for your boss to see, but working hard, even if you're called as a slave. And let's be honest, some of us feel like slaves in our workplace. Even as a slave, you can be pleasing to the Lord. You get up in the morning, you get to work on time, you work hard, you do it for Jesus, you go to bed and you sleep. When you put your head on that pillow and you sleep, you know you did your very best for the Lord, and that's it. And that really is a simple life. But a lot of people, to them, that's not enough as a Christian. And I hear you saying the exact opposite of that, and I'm really, really pleased to hear that. So if you're talking to young professionals, and I know at your church, being right there by Cal Berkeley, and having a lot of young people coming into the church, you guys have had a long history of students getting saved and coming into your church. How can those young people, as they graduate and join the workforce and become really, in a lot of ways, professionals, how can they start living out their faith in the career, so they don't get that kind of idea, I got to be radical, I got to do something that is over the top, or I got to put my job at risk because I need to have Bible studies in the middle of the workday with my people, or I'm not being faithful to the Lord. What advice would you give to a young professional just getting into their career, and they want to be faithful Christians? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a good point for someone who's just starting out in the working world. I think one of the things that I've told people is to have right expectations and priorities, and to really focus on when you're at work, focus on being at work, and not to focus on other things that distract. But the reason why you're in the workplace is to perform a task, to use your strength, to use your mind. And that's, if you're not a good worker, that's not a good testimony.
Right.
But if you are a good worker, that provides an opportunity for people to ask you about the reason for the hope that is in you. And that gives rise to opportunities for people to be curious about, why are you different? And I think that's where it takes diligence for people to do good to others. I think some questions about emphasis and focus are really important for young professionals entering the workforce. Sometimes the focus can really be on me. How can I succeed, or how can I be faithful at work? And I think as soon as one thinks about oneself too much, it's almost the focus is off. The questions that I think are the more helpful ones to ponder are, how would the Lord be pleased in the ways that I use my time today? Mm-hmm. How can I make my boss get promoted? Mm-hmm. How can I be profitable to my company? How can I benefit my coworkers? How can I be the best teammate I can be so that other people have the opportunity to excel in their career? How can I support others? And it's a practical place where throughout the day you can practice selflessness and really focus on, not on yourself, not on just what you're going to do after you finish your time, but really focus on how can I be pleasing to the Lord, and focus and doing a good job. That's godly. Like you were describing, finishing your work week and then having additional time and energy to pour forth into one's family and other responsibilities and opportunities in the church. Just being a good worker is godly. And I think it's that pursuit of excellence. And I think another part of it that I would suggest to younger people is to make sure that they're really gauging their spiritual life and vitality on the right things. And what I've found as a trend among students is that they have students have a lot of flexible time. They may not realize it because they think they're busy with final exams, but really they have a lot of flexible time. And sometimes I've seen students get into a trap of gauging their spirituality by their performance in terms of how much time did I spend reading the Bible? How much time did I spend praying? How many spiritual activities did I be involved in over this past week? How much time did I spend with other Christians? And especially for people on a college campus where you have an opportunity to interact with a lot of other Christians, a lot of other campus ministry opportunities, one could start to gauge their spirituality by their involvement in those things. And what happens when you get into the workplace and you realize that the margin of your time is slim, you finish working 8 to 10 hours a day, and you're tired, and that no longer becomes the true measure. I think the true measure of one's sanctification and one's relationship with the Lord is how much we love Him. Loving Him first, putting Him first, and it's godly for that person to squeeze out their 15 minutes of Bible reading while they're in their car just about to go into the office, or listening to an audio Bible while they're commuting on the train to work, and squeezing those moments and making the most of it. And so I think that having realistic expectations is important. I'll say that there's another thing that I would recommend to young professionals also is to really work on the discipline of contentment.
Mm,
I
yeah.
I think that a lot of people become discontent with their work because they expect more, or sometimes they expect to just do their job and then move on to something else that they really want to do.
Yeah.
And it it really prompts that kind of focus on the self instead of focus on others. And when one is content with your job, be excellent in it. Do well at it, and don't just be good in your job, but try to do it so well that you would become recognized as an expert in what you do.
Yeah.
And people will seek you out when you do something really good. And I think that having that type of excellence and that striving is important. The perspective I would give is that if you're in the office 40 to 50 hours with your coworkers each week, you're spending more time with your coworkers than most people in your family and your church. And the question is, are you redeeming that time?
Yeah.
And Ephesians 5 talks about that. Look carefully how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil.
Yeah.
And that's a great opportunity to redeem the time. If you can use that time to build relationships with people, to be involved in their lives, and to be available for them to help make others succeed, that's a great opportunity for the workplace to build diligent habits for life, and to be able to grow. And your job is to do really good in your job. And as you do that, there will always be opportunities that come from that.
Yeah, those are helpful. I think of the Proverbs where it talks about that being excellent, being a craftsman really in what you do, and that even kings will seek you out. And, we have at least two examples I can think of that pop into my head would be Joseph and the way that he served his masters, and they changed, as well as Daniel and the way that he served his masters. They were well known for just the excellence by which they did it, and they were guided by the Lord's wisdom. They were endowed, I think, in special ways that we wouldn't necessarily say we're endowed with, but they were known by everybody around them for the excellence in which they worked. And of course, they did it We can even think of Joseph when he was in Potiphar's house, when he was trying to tell Potiphar's wife, no, I can't do this thing. And he wasn't thinking about himself. What would that do to me in my career? Or he was saying, this is my master and the Lord. I can't sin against them in this way. And so again, what you're saying is echoing true with what Scripture says is just serve the Lord and do it well. Now, you talked about this work-life balance, and I know you said you didn't prefer that term, but I've heard a lot of people talk about priorities in the way of it's God first, and then your family second, and then the church, and then and yourself or whatever. They put those things in order. But I think there's some issues with that because life isn't always that way. So because of what you said there's really no problem with that until there's conflict. How do you balance being a good employee while living out those Christian values that pop up during your daily life, like honesty, integrity, kindness? You need to do what's right. Ethics come into that a lot, massively, and yet there can be some pull one way or the other, especially when the instructions coming from an employer might be that you're not to be those things, that you have maybe an unethical boss, maybe you work for an unethical company. You're in a very professional industry, but there may be some of our listeners that working, in one of the trades where there's a lot of competition and a lot of temptation by those that we work for to say, cut corners here, save us some money. And then the potential is either I'm on the outs with my boss, my immediate report, and then there may be I get a promotion if I do what they say. So how do you balance those kinds of things in the workplace?
Yeah, those are some good questions, because those are real situations that exist because we live in this fallen world. I like what you mentioned earlier about Daniel and him being known for his excellence, and he endured. He had a long career as a politician of sorts, serving over multiple administrations, and because God blessed him, yeah, and made him to be a good worker. And there's a lot to learn about that pressure situation from Daniel. And he was living in a foreign land. He knew that was not his real permanent home, and he had the determination to set some non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really good place to start. And that was something that my pastor, Pastor John Shim, I know you know him well. Yeah. And he had counseled me when I was getting ready to start work. And I had started work around the same time that my wife and I were married. I started work in January, and our wedding was in March. And so it kind of, both of those things for me happened around the same time. But he really helped me, and my pastor, and said, set some non-negotiables, John-Michael. Determine what are the things that you already know that you will not do, and set the things that you will do. And that way, when you're in a pressure situation in the office, you will already know, and you will be able to quickly understand what's a matter of preference, and then what's a matter of non-negotiables because of what's something God has clearly commanded. Mm-hmm. And Daniel said this. It was in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. It said, Daniel set in his heart that he would not defile himself. Yeah. And so they were offering him, the choice food, but he said no. He already set in his heart that he wasn't going to cross that line. Mm-hmm. But I really like the way Daniel handled that situation. He didn't just rush out of there and make a big commotion about it. But it says at the end of verse 8, it says, so he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. And so he appealed and he made a request, and he had a conversation, and that was an opportunity for him to express his faith in God and submission to God's laws. And in that there's that whole dialogue of where there was a little bit of pressure that was there, and he kind of had to understand what was the pressure that the commander had also, because he was under authority, and he had to meet certain expectations. And in talking with the commander, Daniel gets the permission for a test period, and then God shows himself faithful and gracious in that.
Yeah.
And so I think when people find themselves in pressure situations in the workplace, I think we need to humble ourselves and realize that yeah, I don't have this together. I do need help, and I do need to ask questions and appeal to my supervisor, appeal to my project manager, ask questions, and just be honest with people and say, I know you're asking me to do this, but honestly, I'm just not comfortable doing this. And I think that then it helps to really bring the issues up. And I think that if you have a conscience issue about something that you're being asked to do, I think you should bring it up in the workplace. And because being a worker who's not able to do the job, that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the company. It's not good for you in your service to the Lord. And it's not good for the customer either. Getting someone that isn't really going to do the job that they desire. And so being honest and having integrity, being a man of your word, exercising kindness, those are all things that I think people want those things in the workplace. And so I think that if you're humble and transparent about the pressures that you have, then I would hope that the people in positions of leadership in the office would respond the right way.
Yeah, and I think there's probably always going to be an occasion where you have a boss whose God is the dollar, and he's just saying, I don't care about your ethics. And it does help if we are living a consistently good testimony before them, that they understand where we're coming from. It's like, this is a good guy, he works hard, he's doing what he needs to do, but I still don't agree with him because the bottom line is what I'm about is money. And then we have another example from the book of Daniel, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had set their hearts as well that they appealed to Nebuchadnezzar. We're not going to worship this golden image that you've set up. And he says, okay, well, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to let you do it. And if not, I'm going to throw you. And this is the consequence, right? You're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your life. And they say, we don't have to, and we know what we're going to answer you, O king. We will not bow down. And you throw us in, but maybe our God will save us, maybe he won't, but we won't do it. And I think that setting our hearts at the beginning, even as we're starting careers, or even in the midst of it, and we say, these are things I will not do. And if it costs me my job, if it costs me my career, if it costs me everything, I just am not going to cross that line. And I think we might, in many cases, be able to appeal, and I think we should. But I think that when we set those parameters in our hearts and we say, I won't cross this line, we also need to understand it may be a point where you either cross that line or you lose everything. And we have to have it set in our hearts, I'm not going to cross that line, and I'm willing to lose everything. And that's the difference between just something that we think is a nice idea, it is an ideal, and then there's the real reality of this is a conviction. I am so convicted by this truth that I will not cross that line ever. And I think we need to make sure that, especially young professionals, young people that are in a job where it's real easy just to tell your boss off and leave. No, you need to appeal. You need to be gracious and kind. You need to show the patience of Christ, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that because you do that, it's going to always work out well. You may end up getting canned, and if you do, so be it. The Lord will provide. He always takes care of his people, especially when we stand by his word. But this is not a secret formula. If you appeal to them, you tell them you're not comfortable, that nothing's going to happen, that it's going to work out. Because it might not, right? It might not. You might get fired. And that really does play into the next question I want to ask you. What role does prayer play in decision making when you're thinking about work? And even if you have to go to a boss and share with them, maybe a supervisor, and say, I don't feel comfortable with this, I would imagine prayer is going to be involved in there. So for you, what role does prayer play in not just the negative stuff, but even decision making? You've got to make some decisions, some of them simple, some of them complex. Does it have any role in your job or in your life, or is it only when you're at church?
The prayer all the time.
Yeah.
Pray without ceasing. Know that God is there, and he is in control over your circumstances. And he is the one who provides you with the job and the means to make wealth. And he is the one who is in control of the whole universe. And so prayer is something that should always be there with decision making. And I really have been influenced by the example of Nehemiah. Mm-hmm. There are several instances in Nehemiah where things are happening, and he just prays in the middle of it. I really like towards the beginning in Nehemiah chapter 2, in verse 4, it says that the king asks him, what would you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And then the next verse, then he responds back to the king. And it's just that it's in the middle of the dialogue. And he just says, he hears from the king, what would you request? And this is like the king. I mean, you have to engage with him. You can't just, turn away and hide. But he just says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. And that was his response, is that he got a question, that it was his opportunity. And so he prayed. And there's other examples, like in chapter 4, when Tobiah the Ammonite was taunting him. Mm-hmm. And it says that in verse 3, Tobiah says, even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone wall down. And then the next verse 4, he just says, hear, O our God, for we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads, and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have vexed the builders. So he hears this. There's a situation, someone's taunting him, and immediately his response is just to pray, and to turn to God. And I love verse 6 after that, because he just says, so we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, and the people had a heart to work. And it's that preparation to know that, okay, I have a job, I have a role and a purpose. I know what my non-negotiables are. I know that if I get asked to do this, I know I'm just going to say no. Like, that's it. And to have that resolve, like Daniel, to have that resolve, like you mentioned, about how there's some things that if I lose the job, if it's a job where you're truly pressured to do something that is against your conscience and against the word of God, it's not a job that you want. Right. And it may be better for you to not be in that situation. But if that's not it, then there's an opportunity for you to pray and ask for wisdom and turn to God right away. And I think that in the pressure situation of being in the workplace, sometimes you're called upon to make a decision, and that's an opportunity to pray. It's also an opportunity to be humble and realize, okay, I'm being put into a pressure situation. Um, can I appeal for more time to make this decision?
Mm.
And ask, I defer to people and say, I think I know the answer, but can I confirm after I check with my supervisor, or can I confirm tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
Let me think about this. And this happens in the construction industry all the time.
Mhm.
As part of my job as a structural engineer, I'm out on construction job sites, and I get questions about the design and what should be built. And I remember many situations where there's a pressure situation. You've got a crew of welders standing around looking for direction on what size this weld needs to be, or how to deal with a very particular condition in an existing building. And there's a lot of pressure to make those decisions on the spot. But sometimes if I'm not sure it's the right decision, I'll tell them it's like I think the answer is this, but I need to confirm with the person in charge of the project back in the office.
Mm.
Give give me another few hours so that I can make sure that this is the right thing to do.
Mm.
And those are the moments when prayer is important, making sure that you're doing things that are safe and right,
Mm.
and also knowing that you shouldn't be prideful either, thinking that you need to do everything right away. And so prayer changes the situation, because we recognize that we're not in ultimate control. The Lord is.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you brought up Nehemiah, and he speaks to the king. He's got a long face after he's heard the condition of Jerusalem, and the king asks him about that. And then, you're right, he prays, but when he responds to the king, he has a plan already as well. So there's also this kind of background preparation, is in case the Lord gives me this opportunity, I'm going to be ready with an answer, because the Lord had to open the door for the king to even allow him to go, for the Lord to provide the resources for him to go back and to build and to do what he needed to do. And when the king offered it, he had the plan kind of laid out loosely there, waiting on
Mm,
what would happen. And so he wasn't just praying as just a formality. It was actually by faith. Lord, if you're going to move this man, then I'm going to be ready for that to happen and have a follow-up with that. And boy, that's a lot of faith, because he knew that God answers prayer, and he was trusting that if he did, this would be what would happen. So again, I think that fits really, really well with what we're thinking, as far as I got to pray, not just let me just pray and then do what I think I'm going to do, but truly depending on the Lord to give you an answer, knowing that the Lord, as you said, is sovereign, and he moves. He moves the heart of the king, but he moves the heart of the
mm,
supervisor as well. And we need to trust him. And I love that you said we need to humble ourselves, because sometimes the Lord will correct us, or even change our heart. We want him to change their heart, but he might change our heart and say, yeah, I was going down the wrong path, and I realize now that you were right, I was wrong. So that's great. Now, kind of wrap this up, but I think one of the biggest questions that often people have regarding faith and the workplace is using our jobs, the position that the Lord has given to us, as a platform for sharing the gospel, but being careful not to cross boundaries. There are a lot of boundaries
mm,
depending on the job. A guy that's up on the roof, he's swinging a hammer and he's putting down tiles. He's got his other friends there. They can talk, because you don't really have to engage deeply in thought. I mean, obviously you need to think about what you're doing, but it's not the same as the guy that's intensely looking at a computer screen laying down code. So recognizing there's differences, what have you found as kind of, how can you share the gospel and still be a good testimony, still be a great worker, not sacrifice any of that? Have you found that there's any useful counsel that you might share with anybody that says, I want to be a better witness at work? Yes, I
mm,
need to be a hard worker, but outside of that, because the gospel, it has to be spoken. It can't just be, I'm a good worker, because there's good workers that don't know Jesus. So as a good
mm.
worker who knows Christ's saving grace and knows the gospel, Any advice for somebody that's saying, how can I do that at work?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to be impactful in the workplace that way, and it's not so much that your career is the tool. I think it's really your life that is the instrument in God's hands. And I like the example you gave about, guys swinging hammers, because I'm really glad to be working in the construction industry.
Yeah.
And I get to meet all kinds of people from all walks of life. I get to meet the field laborer when I go out to a job site and watch them work and ask them questions and let them ask questions to me also. And at the same time, sometimes on the same day, I'm in a corporate office talking to a leader of a very large corporation about their aspirations for a new building, for their new campus. And so when you're in the workplace, you get the opportunity to connect with people and to build relationships with people that you would probably otherwise not really have a conduit to get to know them at all. And in that relationship, there's an opportunity to learn about them, be a friend to them, be available to help people. And I think that there's those external professional relationships with clients and customers, and there's also the internal relationships with all of your coworkers, the people that you see on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And as you continue to live your life, I think that this is where, as we do good work and as we're known for our kindness and grace and our service to them, then we should expect that people will ask us questions. I'm reminded of 1 Peter chapter 3 in verse 15. It says, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and fear." And it's that first part: sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. Set him apart as your Lord. And what that will look like is that you'll be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you. And it kind of assumes that people will ask you. Yeah. And that I think is where, as you're spending this 40 plus hours with other people, it's an opportunity for you to serve people on an individual level. Be available to help people. If you're a really good worker and you're looking out for the best interest of others, and you're always available to help people, to bring solutions, to bring expertise, to ask someone like, "Hey, you don't look so well today. You look kind of down. How can I help today?" And even just humbly sharing about the pressures that you might be having. It's like you might be having a bad day. You come into the office and you're tired, and just share with people and say, "Yeah, I having a really difficult and challenging time at home because the situation emerged, something where maybe we have like a sick family member, need to take care of them," and really use that as an opportunity to open up your life to other people and kind of draw them into a relationship with you. Ask people for help. I think that's something where, out of pride, sometimes we think we want to show that, oh, we've got it together. But no, be humble. Ask people for help. Know what people are good at, and invite them into your life in that way. And not just to be nosy and poke into other people's lives, but open up your life and allow people to get to know you. And that's a fantastic way to build relationships with people, and for people to ask questions, to share about the things that you do. I think on Mondays there's usually an opportunity to share about what you did over the weekend. Right. And talking to people and just tell people, yeah, on Sunday we had worship service, and it was such a blessing, because I learned more about God's word. Mm-hmm. And how I could live it out. And I realized that there were some things that that were really missing from my life. I wasn't doing what the Lord expected me to do. And now I know what I need to do this week.
Yeah.
And really just kind of opening up to people. Be such a good worker that people want to work with you. Always be available to pick up additional tasks. Always be able to build a relationship with people and not be swayed. And I think that on the flip side, you need to get your job done too.
Yeah.
It's not just a time to socialize with people, but if you're consistent with the work that you're doing and you do good work, then you'll be recognized. And that's what the Lord wants us to do in the workplace, is that we're not going to transform the world, and we shouldn't expect that, but we should expect to be faithful and diligent and to serve others.
That's good. I think, one of those opportunities, sometimes people will share with us things they're going through that we just ask them, would you mind if I prayed for you? Not even necessarily in that moment. That's not always the best time to do it, especially with others around, but just asking them permission. Can I pray for you? And then follow up, truly be praying for them, and then follow up and say, hey, how is your mother doing? I've been praying for her. I think that gives opportunity for us to just show kindness, even if they don't believe in the God of the Bible. They think it's a nice overture. Very few people will say, no, don't pray for me. But I think also it invites them to come to us and say, I know you're a person of faith, or I know you're a Christian. Would you pray for this for me? And I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to even introduce our faith to people in a way that's just a stepping stone into maybe sharing more with them if we have an opportunity. And I'm glad that you said do your work, work hard, because we've all been around Christians who they stand around the water cooler, or they sit around the break room when it's not break time anymore, and they talk about the Bible, and the boss hates them because they don't do work. They're just lazy. And you just kind of wish they wouldn't tell everybody they're Christian, because now you don't want to be identified with them because they're not hard workers. And so it is incredibly important that we have a good testimony at work. That way, when we do have a chance to share our faith in some way, that we don't get identified with laziness, that Christians are lazy workers, or Christians are always taking longer breaks, longer lunches. They don't get their job done. They don't have integrity in the workplace. And of course, we don't want to bind Christ's name to that. And so we want to make sure that we're doing our job very well. And then naturally, when those things come up. Well, John-Michael, thank you so much for all that you've shared with us, the wisdom and the counsel and the experience that you have shared with us today. We'll make sure to put your podcast there at Evangel in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can look at the show notes. It'll have a link to the podcast if you'd like to listen to the podcast coming out of their church. And we want to encourage you that if you're not part of the IFCA, or you don't know about us, and maybe somebody turned you on to our podcast and you're listening and you're saying, what is this IFCA that you talked about? We'd invite you to go and check out our website at ifca.org. There you can get other resources. You can also find out about what we believe, as well as how you can join if you think that you might want to become a member. We want to encourage you to go and listen to all of our other podcasts. If you're not on a podcast application, whatever your favorite app is for listening to podcasts, you might want to tune in on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel, and we'd love for you to subscribe either on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. It helps us out. And if you have any feedback, of course, you can put that in the comments on YouTube, or you can put that in our show notes. There's a place for you to leave us a comment or two and let us know how we're doing, what you think, or if you have any follow-up questions. We'd love to read those and respond as we're able to. Well, until next time, thanks for listening to Advancing the Cause. I'm your host, Richard Bargas, and until next time, bye-bye.